9:30. We are at the offices of HART, and we thank HART for their hospitality in hosting us here today. Commissioner Seal, will you lead us in the pledge?
We stand.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Sue, please call the roll.
Chair Jim Holton.
Here.
Melanie Griffin. Cliff Manuel.
Here.
Michael Millett.
Here.
Commissioner John Minton.
Here.
Commissioner Pat Kemp.
Here.
Commissioner Betsy Benak.
Here.
Commissioner Catherine Starkey.
Here.
Commissioner Karen Seal.
Present.
Kathleen Shanahan. Commissioner Janet Long.
Here.
Mayor Rick Kreisman.
Here.
Mayor Bob Buckhorn.
Here.
Secretary David Gwynn.
Here.
Secretary L.K. Nandam.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Sue, and please also give the public service announcement.
Persons wishing to address the board are required to complete a comment card and give it to staff. Public comment will be limited to 3 minutes. Public comment period can be extended for up to 30 minutes.
Thank you, Sue. There are numerous comment cards here today, so please try to limit your comments to the 3 minutes. We have a very ambitious schedule, so we want to get through it as quickly as we can. Chair recognizes William Hunter.
Good morning. I live in Seminole Heights at 5806 North Branch, and I'm here to speak against consolidating the 3 metropolitan planning organizations. I think it would be a poor idea to make a change that would remove them from local access and control. Thank you.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Karen Mullins.
Is there a second name on the next card?
You had one card filled out, and then there was also with Bob Hinion.
Okay. All right, we'll go first. I'll go first. My name is Karen Mullins. I sit on the TBARTA CAC, and we were given a presentation by all for transportation, and I'd like to make an inquiry into the board members of that organization. I have put in a request and have not received an answer yet, so I'm asking the board to have that for us. Thank you. And now we're going to go 2 of us.
Okay.
So this is Bob Hinion. Go ahead.
This is primarily Karen's initiative. She felt that since we have lapel pins or badges for most of the organizations we belong to, it's about time that TBARTA did. And TBARTA staff and finances was trained far enough to have to deal with this kind of little thing. So Karen took it on her own to come up with this, arrange them, had them made sufficiently for all board members, all CAC, and the entire staff of TBARTA.
So we're giving this to you. We hope you wear it with honor. Transportation is important to us, especially at the CAC, and want to know that you're on board with us. So thank you.
Thank you very much for that.
This is on us as a gift.
Yes. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much. Chair recognizes Lisa Monteleone.
Good morning, board members, and it's good to see all of you again. Thank you for your service. I know it takes a lot of time and a lot of commitment, so thank you for that. I haven't spoken at one of these meetings in a very long time, maybe since the time I was sitting where you were. But I came out this morning because this is a really important issue. There have been several attempts to merge the boards over the years. I remember 2 very distinctly. One, when it was an issue for the state, and another when it was an issue for the federal government. Neither time did I think that it was appropriate. To loosely quote, government that serves best is closest to the people. And by combining the boards and moving these meetings to various locations, I know from serving on the Transportation Leadership Group, when we used to meet in Pinellas County, it was very difficult for people on this side of the bay to go and, talk to us when we were at the PSTA offices there, and we met there. But, you know, taking not only the voices away from the meetings in public comment, you're taking away the ability for people maybe of restrictive abilities to have their voices heard. And not only to have their voices heard, but to have their issues addressed. So by what I see as maybe a watering down of the public involvement in these meetings is a disservice not only to the citizens of Hillsborough County, but all of the others as well. So I would appreciate if you would take very thoughtful consideration, which I know you do on every issue, but this is extremely important and will change how we govern from the time the vote is taken forward. So thank you very much for your time this morning. I appreciate you all, and have a good weekend.
Thank you so much. Chair recognizes Rick Fernandez.
Good morning. Rick Fernandez, 2906 North Elmore, Tampa 33602. I'm president of the Tampa Heights Civic Association. It's only my second time before you. I'm glad to be back again. Here to speak on your agenda item 7E, which is the MPO merger issue, and to put a stake in the ground on behalf of Tampa Heights to let you know that we oppose the consolidation of these three MPOs. And I'm going to take a little poetic license here and quoting from an article that appeared in the Times last year, Caitlin Johnson article, and she was quoting a lady that I don't know, Barb Hazelden, who is apparently a Tea Party activist. I seldom have opportunity to quote Tea Party activists, so this will be my bucket list for the morning. A regional MPO would run counter to the purpose of the organization, specifically to give local governments a voice in transportation and help them bring in state and federal dollars. President Donald Trump recently repealed a rule urging areas to merge multiple MPOs into one regional agency. People don't want to form these mega regions. They want to keep their own sovereignty. That quote pretty much captures the moment for me and mine. I would like to remind you, for those of you that don't know, Tampa Heights sits literally in the shadow of our malfunction junction, the very center of the transit spine that we tend to talk about frequently. Therefore, we're very sensitive to decisions that are being made in rooms like this rather regularly. The key for us is accountability, and the merger of these MPOs, as is being suggested by this proposition, is absolutely counter that and moves us in the wrong direction. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Rick. Chair recognizes Doug Joseph.
Good morning. My name is Doug Joseph. I live at 6007 Suwannee Avenue. I'm here representing the Old Seminole Heights Neighborhood Association, where I serve as the chairman of the Committee on Highways and Byways. I, too, would like to address the issue of merging the MPOs and voice OSHNA's emphatic and irreconcilable opposition to that proposal. The current model that we have is actually quite successful. People do, in fact, have an opportunity to address the local MPO. If you've followed the news in the last few years, you know that literally hundreds of people have taken the opportunity to address the Hillsborough MPO. That seems to be something that's actually working. It's working because citizens who are directly affected by transportation decisions have the opportunity to address the people making those decisions. The proposal to merge the MPOs would, in effect, water down the authority of, or the political power, if you will, of people living in the city, and it would skew the regional MPO in favor of broader suburbia. And of course, what will happen then is that we'll be told that we need to think regionally. This is a slogan that one hears all the time. We must think regionally about transportation issues. Ask yourself, what does that mean? And in practice, what that means is let's think suburban. Let's think sprawl. Let's try and get as many people as far from the centers of the cities as we can and move them as quickly as we can from one place to another. But that's just not a model that's successful. In the long run, what we have is a massive sprawl problem, and the more regionally we think about how to get people from here to here, the worse things get. The regional MPO proposal looks like something that's intended, right, to hurry along this process of ever-increasing sprawl, and I recommend against it. And as a matter of fact, MPOs were established in the 1960s precisely to avoid this kind of problem. If you read the Tampa Interstate Study from 1957, what you see is that the people who made the decisions to build the interstates couldn't care less about people living in the cities. Their entire focus was getting as many people through Tampa as possible. So let's keep the MPO structure as it is, recognizing the history of the MPOs and the effectiveness they've shown. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for those comments. Those are the only comment cards I received. Sue, any more comment cards? Is there anyone else wishing to make public comment? None being, oh, is there?
I'm done.
Please.
That's what I get for being a little late in traffic.
Not a problem.
It's Kevin Thurman. I'm here today to say that I think it's very important as you look to have these conversations about regional cooperation that you put vision in front of governance, and that you have a conversation where everybody is on the same page with an entire vision of what you're doing before we have a conversation about governance, which I think is a very complicated, long-term solution issue. We have a very important thing where 70,000 some odd citizens put a referendum on the ballot in Hillsborough County that might put them in a very different position from the rest of the region, allowing them to lead it. And so I really suggest that you take your time, come together on a vision before you look at governance. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else? None being heard, I'll close public, oh, I'm sorry. Yes, sir.
Christopher Gleason. I also oppose this combining of MPOs, as this board's responsibility itself to think regionally for our future needs. TBARTA was created for this purpose, and any combining MPOs would be redundant. Makeup of this board shows this directive with monthly meetings of the MPO directors and the Tampa Bay Transportation Management Area Leadership Group. Each county has its own needs and goals that is to be solved by that county. Hillsborough County has an expanding population, future development, and economic driver of this region. It only has 3 cities in such a large county. Pinellas County has a stable population for decades, all developed, and a multitude of cities. Pasco County has an expanding population with a lot of newer development and a large amount of commuters. Then we can work on connecting these systems, as coordination is an ongoing process that has been happening and will continue to go on in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else? Okay, I will close public comment. Thank you, everyone, for your comments. The next item of business, Chair recognizes Bill Johnson on the CAC report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Board members, good morning. It's my pleasure to give a report on the Citizens Advisory Committee activities. We did meet on August 15th at the offices of TBARTA. An agenda for that meeting is included in your agenda package. I'm not going to go over it. Of special interest to the committee was a report on the status of the Regional Transit Feasibility Plan. We are excited that the plan has concluded its public outreach phase and will be incorporating appropriate revisions from that outreach into the final report. The CAC understands that there is a peer review by Pinellas County, the start of which is being deferred until after the general election. We are troubled that the timing is being deferred until the final regional transit feasibility report is completed. The CAC voted unanimously to encourage completion of any additional reviews as quickly as possible. As your Citizens Advisory Committee, that is the only advice to pass on at this meeting. I recommend a review of the minutes of our meetings if you need additional information or if you have questions. We have passed the important point of being past having difficulty in achieving a quorum at our meetings. Thank you for appointing such dedicated and energetic members to the CAC. I'm sure we will have great advice for you after our October 17th meeting. And in closing, I'd like to take a brief moment to recognize the former CAC Chair, Anthony Palmieri, for his service. Could you join me? It's my pleasure to present this resolution from the TBARTA board. And it reads, a resolution of appreciation for the service of Anthony Palmieri as chairman of the TBARTA Citizens Advisory Committee. Whereas the Tampa Bay Regional Transit Authority is an agency of the state of Florida created to improve mobility, to plan, develop, finance, construct, own, purchase, operate, maintain, relocate, equip, repair, manage, and expand multimodal transportation systems and operations in his 5-county region, consisting of Hernando, Pasco, Pinellas, Hillsborough, and Manatee counties. And whereas the legislation creating TBARTA also established a Citizens Advisory Committee to provide citizen input to the TBARTA Governing Board on transportation issues of regional significance. And whereas Anthony Palmieri served with distinction as a member of the CAC from 2010 through 2017, and during that time served as the CAC Land Use Subcommittee, the CAC Performance Measurement Subcommittee, and as Vice Chairman and Chairman of the CAC. And whereas during his service on the CAC, Anthony Palmieri was instrumental in creating the Transit-Oriented Development Guidelines and the TBARTA Performance Measurement Scorecard. And whereas the TBARTA Governing Board greatly benefited from regular reports on the activities and recommendations of the CAC with Anthony Palmieri, has provided to the board, and whereas through the tireless efforts, demonstrated commitment, and leadership of Anthony Palmieri, the CAC has continued to make meaningful contributions to TBARTA in its efforts to address the regional transportation needs of Tampa Bay area, and has served as a critical means of providing citizens' involvement in programs and mission of TBARTA. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the Governing Board that the TBARTA Governing Board hereby expresses its appreciation to Anthony Palmieri for his leadership and dedication to TBARTA and to the entire Tampa Bay region, and further, the TBARTA Governing Board directs that this resolution be presented to Anthony Palmieri in recognition of his valuable service to the Tampa Bay region, and it's approved and adopted by the Governing Board of TBARTA on this 24th day of August 2018, and signed by the Chairman and our Executive Director.
Wow.
Thank you so much.
What to say? Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I really don't know what to say. This came as a surprise to me a couple of days ago when I saw the meeting agenda with my name on it. Thank you very much. Thank you. As I explained it on a previous meeting, you know the reason why I decided not to seek reappointment to the committee. And I don't want to go over that again, but I guess some of you know that. I enjoy very much serving on the CAC for 8 years. I made many friends and some enemies. I guess that goes with the territory. And I intend to remain involved in transportation, and I will be attending some of the meeting whenever I can. Again, thank you very, very much for this. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And thank you so much, sir, for your service to this community and this region. You have been of immeasurable help to us, and we truly hope that you will stay involved. And this is exactly what citizens are supposed to do. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts for your service to this community. Our next item is election of officers, and for that, the chair is going to recognize our General Counsel, Alan Zimmett, to conduct the election.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a reminder to the board members, under the state statute that created this board, you're obligated to appoint 3 officers, the chair, vice chair, and secretary treasurer. Under the statute, the governor appointed Mr. Holden as the chair for a 2-year term, so that is not open for appointment today. What you do have open for appointment is the vice chair and secretary treasurer. Mayor Buckhorn was appointed as the vice chair last year for a 1-year term. And Commissioner Benak was appointed as secretary treasurer for a 1-year term as well. So both of those are up again. Pursuant to your bylaws, you would be appointing today people in those 2 positions for a 1-year term. My suggestion is we take them one by one. Appropriate thing to do would be take nominations from the floor for the position of vice chair. Staff has checked with all board members, and 2 board members have indicated an interest in the vice chair position, Mr. Manuel and Ms. Griffin. So I will take nominations from the floor for vice chair.
I would like to nominate Cliff Manuel for vice chair.
Second.
No need to second nominations.
Oh, no need?
No. Is there any other nominations?
Robert's
from the
rules.
floor? If not, I will take a motion to appoint Mr. Manuel as vice chair.
So moved. Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Okay, motion passes unanimously. Next, we'll take nominations from the floor for secretary treasurer.
Ms. Long?
I second. Oh, wait, we don't second
I'm
nominations.
sorry, I didn't hear that.
Commissioner Long?
Okay, Commissioner Long was nominated. She did express an interest. The other person that again expressed an interest was Ms. Griffin.
If I can withdraw my interest, I think Commissioner Long would do a great job too.
Okay. Are there any other nominations from the floor?
I'd like to nominate Ms. Commissioner Benak if she would accept it.
I'm willing to give this seat to Commissioner Long. I think she will do a great job. I'm fine with that, but thank you so much for that consideration.
With that, then we'll have a motion to appoint Commissioner Long as secretary.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Chair Holden, I'll pass you back to you.
Thank you, and thanks for that timely process, and thank you, Mayor Buckhorn, for serving as vice chair. We hope to see you soon somewhere in
Not as vice chair.
Congratulations to our new officers and vice chair. Moving on, our next item is and there's only one consent agenda item, and that is approval of the prior minutes. Are there any corrections or additions?
Move approval.
Second. There's been a motion and a second to approve the minutes. Is there any opposition to the motion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Motion carries. Minutes approved. Okay, the next item is the presentation of action items. First up is the chair's report, and I will be brief because we have a lot to do today. The committee meeting is going to occur right after this meeting, but a brief synopsis. On August 10th, the Ad Hoc Committee Search Committee had its first meeting, and we went over practices and procedures. We were supposed to have a visit from Greg Mosier today, who got stuck in traffic, ironically, in Washington, D.C. and missed his flight. But he will be here on teleconference to talk. Initially, there were about 70 good applicants. He has whittled us down to 9, which he is going to present telephonically today to the Ad Hoc Committee. And of those 9, we will probably choose about 4 to 5 to advance on to the next round. They will do a video presentation for the Ad Hoc Committee, and after screening those and going over those, we will make a recommendation to the full board for a round of interviews and include everyone in that process. If there are any other questions about that, myself or staff will be able to answer those. If not, we'll go on to the Sunshine Law Review from Alan.
Mr. Chair, I have one clarification question, if
yes,
I might.
Commissioner Long.
So I thought that we had decided that we would take the recommendations from the recruiter and ask those folks to do the video, and then from that video, we would screen down to the top 4 for interviews.
That's essentially what we're going to do. The process.
Okay, good. I just wanted to make sure I
The process
understood
today,
you correctly.
we will get the recommendations from Greg Mosier. He was going to present the resumes to us formally here in person, but again, he couldn't make it, so we're going to call him. And is he going to be on YouTube, a video, or?
Mr. Mosier will be joining us by phone today, phone only.
But we're going to thoroughly vet all the resumes and discuss his recommendations.
Good.
For the next cut.
Thank you.
So any other questions regarding the process? Okay, that concludes my report. I'll next recognize Council Zimmern again on a sunshine law review.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to make a pretty short presentation because I'm trying to balance the fact that elected officials in the room are required to go a 4-hour training every year on this topic with the government, the members of the governor who are not required to go through that 4-hour training. So I did provide staff, and they included in the agenda a PowerPoint presentation that we include when we do the 4-hour training for the elected officials. So we have that available, and certainly if you have any questions. What I thought I'd do is just go through the basics real quick about sunshine public records, and a few high points of what I think might be applicable to the governing board. And some of that may be, I think, is also applicable to the elected officials who may not receive information on some of these topics in the training. So first, the sunshine law basic requirements are that 2 or more members of the same board or committee cannot meet without 3 things occurring. There would be notice of the meeting, there would be reasonable public access to the meeting, and that there would be written minutes taken. Those are the 3 requirements. Whether the meeting is videotaped or not, written minutes are always required. So one of the things that always comes up is, what is a meeting? A meeting under the law is any communication between 2 members or 2 or more members of the same board. So that communication can take place through written communication, telephonic communication, through a third person. So essentially you are prohibited from speaking or communicating with another board member about a matter that may come up before this board in any fashion, whether that be emails, texts, or spouses, or friends, or whomever. It does not prevent you from speaking to members of other committees that are not members of the governing board. So, for example, the Citizen Advisory Committee, if you want to speak to a member of the Citizens Advisory Committee, you can do that. There are a few exceptions, most of which would not be applicable to this board. Fortunately, we don't have much, we don't have any litigation, but there is an exemption for ongoing litigation and some other things, but they typically would not be applicable here, so I'm not going to spend time going through those. So the big negative, the thing is, I want to make sure you know is there are penalties for a violation, penalties to you personally. There are criminal penalties. You could be removed from office. You could be required to pay a fine. Attorney's fees if somebody is sued, and for purposes of TBARTA, if you violated the sunshine law, the action that the board took could be considered void. So my main point is, if you have a question about whether something you want to do or could do might be a violation of the sunshine law, please give me a call. That'll give you some protection from some of these penalties, and hopefully we'll avoid any kind of claim that there's a sunshine law violation. There is also procedures for curing a sunshine law violation. So if you think something's happened, even inadvertently, we could address it and cure it and correct the problem. So one thing I do want to talk about, I know it hasn't been done at the board, but it's done in some committees, is attendance by phone, by telephone at board meetings. We have no case law on this, but we have numerous Attorney General's opinions, so a synopsis of the Attorney General opinions on attending board meetings by phone. People can attend board meetings by phone under these circumstances according to the AG. Number one, there has to be a quorum physically present. You can't obtain a quorum by people attending by phone. Number two, there has to be exigent or extraordinary circumstances allowing people to attend by phone. Now, what those are, according to the Attorney General, is totally up to the committee. So they could be anything that you or the committee that is allowing people to attend by telephone deemed to meet that requirement and allow people to attend by phone. So it's pretty wide open. There are not a lot of Attorney General opinions as to what they think constitutes extraordinary circumstances. And pretty routinely, committees and boards allow people to attend by phone under just everyday circumstances. An ability to get to the meeting out of town. But certainly, if there's a medical reason or something of that nature, that certainly would meet that criteria. But ultimately, according to the Attorney General, it's up to the board to make that determination. But the key is you have to have a physical form present to conduct business. If the physical form is not available to conduct business and people attend by phone, you can have discussions, but you won't be able to take any votes. The other thing I want to talk about Sunshine Law is the Sunshine Law requires that if you are present, there must be a vote recorded for you unless you have a conflict of interest. So you can't, it's not like in the legislature where some of you were, where you can't abstain from voting. If you are present, you must vote unless you declare a conflict of interest. If you have a conflict of interest, there's a form that needs to be filled out. You need to declare that conflict during the discussion item and identify in the form the basis for that conflict. That conflict, real quickly, is based upon if you would have a special gain or loss. And the key to that is you, under the statute, means not just you, but your family, your employer, and your clients. So if you were an attorney, the client of the firm was before the board to get an award of some procurement, that would benefit that client of your law firm, that would constitute a voting conflict and you would have to abstain from voting. If you have any questions, if you think there might be a problem in terms of a voting conflict, that would be something I would appreciate we talk about before the meeting and I could give you some direction. But the procedure is you have to announce that you have a conflict, that you won't be voting, so that when the minutes are prepared, it will reflect the vote that you abstained. And the purpose on the Sunshine Law is that the minutes must reflect how everybody voted. So if you'll see in the minutes, let's say the vote is 12-1, with Chair Holton voting no, that will let everybody read the minutes know how everybody voted who was present at the meeting. If there's somebody abstains, the minutes would reflect the vote was 12-0, the commissioner with Chair Holton abstaining. Okay. In terms of public records, generally start with the proposition that all documents made or received in your position as a governing board member. This board is a public record. It doesn't matter what the format is, if it's a text, email, or a physical document. It's all public records. But one question always board members want to know is, well, what happens if I take notes during the meeting or in preparation of the meeting? The notes aren't necessarily public records. It depends upon the intent of you making those notes. If those notes are intended to perpetuate some thought for your future use or some other TBARTA staff member or board member's use, then it's a public record. If it's just for you to remember, oh, when this item comes up, I want to say A, B, and C, then it's all for your own personal use, it's not a public record. One of the keys is if you don't want it to be a public record and it's just a personal note to yourself, don't show it to some other TBARTA board member or TBARTA staff member, because once you do that, it becomes a public record. If you happen to get a public records request for any documents you might have in your possession regarding TBARTA, best thing to do is to refer to the TBARTA records custodian. The requirement is you must acknowledge the request, and then you have to respond in a reasonable time. Again, in terms of penalties, never want to get there, but they're very similar to the Sunshine Law penalties that I discussed. In terms of attorney's fees, just recently the legislature adopted a statute that does give us some protection to avoid a claim for attorney's fees on public records requests, because some of you may be aware of lawyers out there that kind of abuse the public records request process purely to obtain attorney's fees from local governments. So there's a protection out there. And redoing the website, one of the things that we're going to do is meet the requirement of this statute to identify the records custodian on the website so that we can avoid, if we have a situation where we get such a public records request, avoid any claim for attorney's fees. So that'll be done when we rewrite or redo the website. So with that, try to stay brief. If anybody has any questions, I'll be glad to answer them, or we can talk privately.
Thank you, Alan. Commissioner Long.
Thank you, Mr. Zimmett, very much. Lean over because I can't see you otherwise. Thank you. So I wanted to just clarify for my own purposes and for those of us that are chairs of other committees, this is a large regional board, and it's difficult at best to have a quorum for our regular board meetings, but when we have committee meetings, that has been really difficult to ensure that we had a quorum in person. And so my question is, would this, because I think I heard you say that if we don't have a quorum in the room, we're not allowed to even have a discussion about any of the items?
No, you can discuss them, you won't be able to vote.
That's what I thought. Thank you so much, because I was going to say, if it was other than that, we'd have to have a little legislative fix.
I think we need to.
Yeah.
No, that's what I said. You can have the discussion.
But you can't vote.
Basically, a workshop, but you cannot take a formal vote. If you don't have a physical quorum.
Thank you, and I will add to that we had considered the idea, and maybe that will be brought up in the legislative committee, of whether to ask the legislature to grant us an exemption, as some boards in the state have that exemption. I will tell you from my own experience that the legislature, because of some abuses of the telephonic rule, have not been liberal in granting that exemption, so we would need to make a compelling case. I think the fact that this board is so diverse geographically that there may be a good case for that. So I'm sure that Commissioner Long, as chair of the legislative committee, will look into that as a substantive recommendation when that committee meets.
And since we're on that subject, Mr. Chair, if I might ask, since we have the two mayors here from the two largest cities, the number one thing that we were hoping to be able to get some relief from the legislature is requiring the presence of both of you at our board meetings, and the inability, the statute does not give you the flexibility to designate someone else to sit in your place. Wouldn't that be amenable to both of you, since you represent the two largest cities in the region? Good.
No, I thought they always wanted to come.
Well, but they, you know, their work, they are in a strong mayor form of government, and their work may not allow them to be here when we have our meetings.
What's more important?
Oh, come on.
I'm joking, all right. Point well taken.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Thanks. Any other questions for Alan on that topic? Okay, I will add to his comments that the Florida Bar has an excellent course on ethics and the Sunshine Law, and I have taken that, having served on a couple other boards. It's about a 4-hour video presentation, and it actually doesn't put you to sleep. It's funny with some funny stories. So for those of you who've taken that, you know what I'm talking about. For others that haven't, I would strongly suggest that through the Florida Bar. Again, thanks, Alan, for those comments. Any other questions on Sunshine? Okay, next item of business is the committee reports, and we'll turn to the Finance Committee. There was no August meeting, so we'll go right into sub-agenda item A, which is the FDOT grant funding resolution. And Michael will present that.
Yes, good morning. There are 3 grant funding resolutions in your packets this morning. At the advice of council, I'm going to go through each one of those individually. for approval and adoption this morning for clarity of record. The first, Resolution 2018-06, is a resolution authorizing execution of a joint participation agreement in receipt of funding from the Florida Department of Transportation District 7 to the Tampa Bay Area Regional Transit Authority Commuter Assistance Program funds in the amount of $870,000. This is specifically for the commuter assistance program that we manage and administer, which is Vanpool, Carpool, Bicycle Buddy, ride matching, and a lot of the employer coordination that we conduct within District 7. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
I have a question.
Yes, Chair recognizes Commissioner Long.
Is this board in a place to approve these grants before we have the operational assessment from our auditor? I'm just asking the question.
Well, we were going to, per Brad's suggestion to me yesterday in discussion with staff, reverse items B and C in terms of the presentation, in terms of the budget. Brad, were you suggesting also that we get the presentation on the forensic audit first before approving grants too, or just the budget?
Mr. Chair, I would suggest going ahead and approving these grants because TBARTA does need these funds. This is pretty administrative.
Okay, thank you. Just wanted to make sure.
Okay, so any other questions for Michael on that first grant?
Move approval. Second.
It's been a motion, a second. Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Great. 2 more to go. Resolution 2018-07, a resolution authorizing execution of a joint participation agreement, receipt of funding from the Florida Department of Transportation District 7 to the Tampa Bay Area Regional Transit Authority for Surface Transportation Program funds in the amount of $350,000 in fiscal year 19. This is specifically for the Vanpool program and the Vanpool program only, and then it supports some of the capital costs of leasing that we have in the subsidy that we provide to potential vanpoolers and existing vanpoolers, bringing down the cost of the lease. If you have any questions about that, I'd be happy to answer them.
Questions for Michael? Commissioner Burnett.
I'll just ask a question, and maybe this was kind of what Janet was leading to also. So this resolution has been reviewed with FDOT standards, and it is meeting their requirements to make sure that we are properly executing this to draw down the funding.
That's correct. It's been reviewed by legal counsel as well.
Okay, thank you. I'll move approval.
Second. Been motion to second. Any discussion? Commissioner Seal, did you have a question? No. Discussion? Any discussion on the motion and the second? All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries.
Last one, Resolution 2018-08, a resolution authorizing execution of a joint participation agreement in receipt of funding from the Florida Department of Transportation District 7 to the Tampa Bay Area Regional Transit Authority Surface Transportation Program funds in the amount of $800,000. This too is specifically for the Vanpool program, supporting the subsidy that we provide. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Questions on this motion?
Second.
Been a motion, a second. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Michael, for those.
Thank you.
Any further questions for Michael? None being heard. Now we are going to switch items B and C, and the chair will recognize Andrew Laughlin for the report on the operational assessment and forensic audit.
Okay, good morning.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Try this one more time. Good morning, everybody. Hear me okay? Perfect. My name is Andrew Laughlin. I'm a principal with Clifton Larson Allen. We are the external auditor for TBARTA. In addition to the audit services we provided for the fiscal year ended September 30, 2017, we also were engaged to perform 2 other projects that were more consultative in nature. One was a grant compliance assessment, and the other was an operational assessment. Both have been substantially completed, so I'm here today just to provide you with an overview and summary of the results of each. And so I'll start first with the grant compliance assessment. So what we did here was what I kind of would term a simulated single audit. So there was no single audit requirement, which is an audit of your grants, essentially, due to the federal and state thresholds not meeting $750,000 as of September 30, 2016. As you can see here, there was $676,000 in federal funds spent as of 9/30/17 and $670,000 in state financial assistance spent. So we didn't perform a single audit as part of our financial statement audit procedures, but at the recommendation of the board, we did a separate consulting engagement to really dig into every single grant that TBARTA oversees and evaluate all the applicable compliance requirements and see if there were any glaring issues of non-compliance or anything where we could see there was some operational efficiencies or things that they could be doing better. And that's essentially what we assessed for all of their grants. And there was 5 total. So there was one state project, so that $670,000 is with the Commuter Assistance Program. And that really serves a broad array of objectives to the organization, from ride-sharing matching, marketing, surveys, outreach, and other similar transportation management initiatives. So that's the Commuter Assistance Program, that's the state project. And then there's 4 federal programs that we looked at as well. And this is all the expenditures to BARTA. Remember, this is in history through September 30, 2017. And so those 4 on the federal side of the Federal Transit Cluster. So this is a regional, consists of 2 separate CFTAs, a regional commuter assistance program, and then the One Call, One Click, which is that online forum that allows individuals to go online, learn more about the program, enroll in it, and it also provides a toll-free number for individuals to call to get enlisted in the program and provide answers to questions that they might have. Then there's also the highway planning and construction. That serves, I think, 3 different projects. One, like the leasing of vans, commuter outreach and education, and then other community-based transportation initiatives. That was handled under the highway planning and construction. The next was a Section 5312 research funds. So this is that One Call, One Click that's specifically marketed to veterans and military organizations. And then the last federal program was the Surface Transportation Program, which is providing funds for their TDM, the Transportation Demand Management, which is an effort for the Tampa Bay region to promote change in travel behaviors. So that's everything we looked at. As I'm kind of describing all these different grants, there's kind of a common theme here, and that's really to take cars off the road and decongest the highways. And that's really the mission of TBARTA here. And so that does create some problems when it comes to grant administration, because you've got a lot of these different federal programs and state projects that serve the overall mission, but each might have their own subtleties. So you're looking at how to allocate costs across each grant, and you want to try to have a reliable, fair, equitable allocation methodology for all their administrative type costs, develop specific planning activities that are going to go in and be charged these specific grants. And that's what we found a lot was lacking, was it was a bit more of a haphazard process on how to allocate those charges amidst grants. And it was more of a reactive process to say, okay, how much money do I have left in my budget in this grant? And that's what we're going to allocate these costs to. So we wanted more planning up front in that process, and you'll see that comment that we have in this report that's kind of pervasive throughout. The other issue that we had, and it kind of dovetails into this first finding I'm going to go through, is just the legacy staffing model that TBARTA had. It was essentially reliant on largely one individual who split time between office administrative functions and then grants administration functions. There was really no singular centralized grants management oversight process. You could see that that was lacking. So there was a lack of resources, and it caused some inefficiencies, and it was less than ideal. And so you can see from our first finding. So what I'm going to do here in this presentation is go through our 7 or so findings and then answer any questions, and we can move on to the operational assessment. But the first finding was just reviewing quarterly reimbursement requests that we selected. All 4 were late. They're supposed to be, in accordance with the grant agreement, I believe 14 calendar days after quarter end. And 2 of those instances, one were over 6 months late. So a lot of reasons we want to get that submitted timely. One's based on cash flow considerations. We need that money coming in so we can pay our vendors timely. Also, just compliance with what the grant agreement is stipulating, that if there's a need to get, a requirement to get it within 14 calendar days, let's do so. And if we can't, for whatever reason, let's coordinate that with the granting agency and document why, if there's ever a need to do so. Same kind of finding here, but different grant. The first one was the Federal Transit Cluster. This was the Commuter Assistance Program, that state project. We noted all 11 selections were submitted for reimbursement within 6 to 10 months after the actual expenditures were incurred. So that was certainly problematic, again, based on liquidity issues and other compliance matters. So, and again, that gets back to the whole inherent issues with the staffing model. The next one is just on planned activities. In a grant that they had with Pinellas MPO, the Lego Ford Pinellas, there were some budget revisions that need to be made after the fact to fit certain line item categories and the expenditures that TBARTA wanted to incur. So a recommendation here just goes back to pre-planning, knowing what the requirements are under the grant, what you're allowed to spend the money on. And so let's plan that up front, collaborate with FDOT, FTA, as the grant representative is needed to really ascertain what can I spend the money on, and get that handled on the front end rather than the back end, offering a mea culpa and trying to do some last minute budget revisions. The next one here is just on progress reports. So there's a reporting requirement in a lot of these grants to submit not only your expenditures and backup, but also provide some narrative on what we've accomplished. And so within each narrative that we reviewed, there's the requirement to actually update every quarter of any progress made since the last quarter. And we saw that a lot of that narrative was just copied over from quarter to quarter, which maybe talked more broadly about their objectives and intentions on satisfying the objective of the grant, but didn't give specifics into, okay, here's this last quarter, here's what we did specifically. So you want to have specific narrative to each quarter as you go along. The next one's on some contract language and overall compliance with the uniform guidance. A conflict of interest policy needs to be, exclude some critical wording, needs to be updated. Also, the entity didn't elect a grace period under for the uniform guidance. Those of you not familiar with the uniform guidance, that's the new federal, well, it's been out for a number of years now, but it's the federal requirements overall for all, that's applicable to all recipients of federal funding. And probably the most prescriptive of all those requirements is within procurement. The feds offered a grace period of a number of years and kept extending it to allow you to keep continued adherence to your own procurement policy, but then eventually you need to update your policy to make sure it's in line with what the feds require in the uniform guidance. So in electing that grace policy, that should be documented in writing, and we didn't see anything that spoke to that. Becoming a moot point now because for starting in fiscal year 19, there is no more grace period. So I'd say the recommendation here is in the immediate term, TBARTA needs to reevaluate its procurement policy, compare that to what the uniform guidance requires, and make sure there's no discrepancies, that we're in full compliance with those procurement requirements. The next one just goes to allocation of costs. Again, I spoke to this previously. So both on the non-payroll and payroll side, we saw some issues. In the 22 non-payroll disbursements, 19 had expenditure allocations that were inconsistent between programs. And again, that's where we need to develop a more reliable allocation methodology for those administrative type costs rather than just evaluating how much money we have in the budget for one versus the other. There should be some consistency in how we treat those types of costs from grant to grant to grant, assuming those administrative costs are allowable. That's obviously the first thing you got to evaluate. And then also we saw this in the time and effort documentation of hours. So on the payroll side, some grants do allow for charging vacation or sick pay to the grant as a viable administrative expense, but how that was allocated didn't really make sense to us. It should be based on, I would think, a proportionate share of the chargeable time. So if you're charging X number of chargeable regular hours, there should be an equitable proportion of that non-chargeable or sick or vacation time. We didn't see that. Same thing with employee benefits costs. We didn't see that equitably charged from grants, so some would absorb others in relation to regular hours than others. So it wasn't consistent, and that's what we're looking for in our recommendation. The next one's the one call, one click. In that grant, it's rare for TBARTA to be actually purchasing capital assets, but it did purchase some net systems equipment during the year. And so a requirement under that agreement is to do an on-site physical inventory. We didn't see evidence of that, so TBARTA needs to familiarize itself with the rules around equipment management and make sure it's adhering to those as it's purchasing any kind of assets that are capital in nature purchased with federal dollars. The next thing here is the results of a search of the SAM system. So anytime a recipient of federal money contracts with vendors for the provision of services or goods, that vendor needs to be checked with SAM, which is the System for Award Management, www.sam.gov, to make sure that, as I colloquially refer to it as the naughty list, make sure they're not on that naughty list, which is the listing of suspended or debarred parties. And so not only should that be done, but also should be retained in their procurement files, and we didn't see evidence of that. So going forward, they need to make sure they're doing that. The last thing here is on rent. This is on the highway research and construction. So it was very unclear within the grant agreement whether or not rent could be charged to this particular grant. And so in those instances, we do recommend addressing that on the front end, saying, hey, here's these types of admin charges that we want to charge or allocate to this grant. And if it's unclear within the actual agreement, let's get correspondence and put that in writing to make sure that those types of charges are allowable. Put that in the file so when the auditor comes at the end of the day, we see that is allowable as communicated. If it's an email or an amendment or addendum to an agreement, we'd want to see that in writing. So that's the findings that we encountered in our grant compliance assessment. Any questions or thoughts or comments on that? Or if not, I can jump into the few slides I have on the operational assessment.
Questions?
I just have one.
Yes, Betsy.
So this is the first time you've delved into, in the auditing process that we've had in the past, this is the first time we've had this kind of a drill down, if you will, into the individual grants. Is that correct?
A full-fledged drill down. So historically, TBARTA has had a single audit requirement, but typically been one grant. So this was a bit more eye-opening for us to uncover everything, if you will, and look at all the grants, and then that way we were better able to identify how they allocate from one grant to the next, and that's where we saw the kind of inconsistencies.
Okay. Well, obviously it's very important to have this kind of look-see, if you will, and then making sure that we are following consistently as we move forward, and we'll have to talk about how we're going to make sure that we do that. So.
And that was the purpose for the forensic audit in the first place, to really see where we've been and where we're going and how to make changes proactively, as we have done, thanks to immense help of PSTA and others to do that. Commissioner Kemp, I believe you have a question.
Thank you. I found it I'm a little taken back by some of this information. Thank you for doing this. I'm glad that we're moving forward. The expenditures that have been made to date, things like the Highway Construction Fund, using that to pay rent, does this put us at any liability for past expenditures and how those were used? Do we know?
I don't think I'm necessarily.
You're probably not the person to respond to that, but I think it might be. I just am wondering if that's an issue.
I think it's an issue, and one of the purposes is getting the good news and the bad together. If there is any exposure, I would ask council to maybe comment on that too, or if that is a premature question, we look into it. I do not think the results of any audits from the federal government have penalized us or fined us in any way, to my knowledge. But that is a very salient question to ask, and that again was one of the impetuses for doing this in the first place, so we can make corrections as needed to be made to move forward.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
I would just like to respond to Commissioner Kemp's comments, because thank you for saying that, Commissioner Kemp. And this whole issue surfaced many months ago after this board was formed back in January, actually, when, as a result of sitting on several other boards related to transit, I began to worry that we, as a new board, didn't know what we didn't know, and had asked for a very simple document that just listed number of employees, what the payroll was, and then I wanted another page that listed, here's all your revenue sources, here's all your expenses. And 2 months later, I still did not have any information. Hence, when we started the issues with finance, it became obvious that we had some very serious issues from within, and we now ended up with this agreement with PSTA. The reason we don't have liability, Commissioner Kemp, I think you'll hear when we hear our financial situation we're in now, is because all of our past liabilities have been cleared up. Imagine that, when you have people managing your finances, your money, and your grants that actually know what they're doing and where the allocations need to be made. So frankly, at the place we're at now, we are trading on the goodwill and the credibility of the leadership team at PSTA, and because of that, we are well positioned to shore up TBARTA until we get into a position where we can literally, function with going forward. And so if we can just get through his recommendations, answer any questions, and then move to the projected budget for next year, I think you'll be enormously pleased at the work that's been done.
Yes, Mr. Starkey.
I'm just curious because I sit on other boards, and we, thinking of AmSkills for one, where we get public money, we do an audit every year. So were they not doing an audit every year here?
Well, that audit didn't go deep enough. That was the problem, and that's why on my suggestion we had a forensic audit, which uncovered this. The problem and the bare standards of auditing do not delve into these issues. And sometimes you have to make that self-evaluation, and I applaud this board's unanimous effort in recommending that. But yes, unfortunately, those things happen, and there have been notable examples throughout this state and others of not uncovering this information for years upon years upon years. We don't need to recite what all those have been. We all know them, but fortunately, this board acted proactively and aggressively to avoid those kinds of issues that could have built up over time. And many of those issues arose out of our lack of funding from the Florida legislature as well. So I think we have finally turned the corner and are in the right direction now to avoid these kind of issues.
And I'm looking forward to the good report that's coming.
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, Cliff.
I don't disagree at all, and the recommendations are awesome. And it's an eye-opener for all of us that are sitting here and reviewing the information for the first time, some of it. But obviously, this is an expertise that requires staffing and other things to follow. There's a lot of recommendations here, and if they go to to a certain place that doesn't understand the complexities of the grants and the ways to actually follow these recommendations, we're not going to get very far down the road for implementation. And I was curious, primarily from Commissioner Long's perspective, since she's been active in this for us, is that being addressed also in our report today as far as staffing is concerned?
Absolutely.
Implementation.
Thank you for bringing that up. And part of it is because I found myself on the Finance Committee, and knowing personally from our experiences, those of us that are elected and have been involved in the Career Source Board mess that happened both on the Hillsborough side and the Pinella side, I certainly didn't want to find myself in the crosshairs just because I wasn't paying attention to the money. So that's how we got where we are now. And I do believe that you'll see a recommendation forthcoming, not only from our great auditor here who's giving us all of this valuable information, but from Ms. Leos when she does her projected budget presentation, that we are no longer going to be pulling dollars out of thin air, and we know where our money's coming from, we know where it's going, and better yet, we know how to allocate it properly to move forward. And I think you'll all be as stunned as I am at the results of the work that's been done just in the last 60 days. It gives me great hope that the next 6 months are going to be fabulous for us.
Absolutely. Commissioner Minton.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Given as how stewardship of taxpayer funds is so important to each of us, and given the fact that what we were using in the past as a level of scrutiny was insufficient, do we have a mechanism to ensure that we have this level of scrutiny going forward, at least on some frequency?
Absolutely, 100%.
I think we do in the interim, and as we move forward and evolve as a board, those are some of the recommendations we will be implementing.
Mr. Chairman, if I might. I just want to note, and I think for those of you who are gubernatorial appointees, you may not be as aware as I have become being an elected official how much the government operates on grants and interfund transfers. And it is extremely important to comply with those requirements. It is a very special talent that staff has typically to make sure that we're complying with all the requirements of federal grants, state grants, but it's not easy, especially when it comes to transit grants, and we have some creative grants that have been, new things like Pick My Kid, things like this. So I am hopeful that with the help from PSTA that they are familiar and will ensure moving forward. I'm very impressed with our accountant. And he understands so well the mission and what we're trying to do, but understanding how important it is that we meet all these. So I am hopeful going forward, but will cost more money to make sure that we have this level of analysis, because you have to spend the money and spend the time. So
point well taken.
Right.
Please continue.
Well, I appreciate the sentiments, and it takes me into, I guess, let's try to get to the piece of the good news is what can we do going forward to right the ship. And so that's, when we started this operational assessment, the initial impetus behind that was more of where we identified some issues of vendors were not getting paid timely, grant reimbursements weren't happening on a timely basis. There's a bottleneck somewhere, what's going on? And so it was really trying to delve into current processes and figure out where we can make some fixes. And then that morphed over time as I think it became rather self-evident that yes, we do have these inherent problems, and TBARTA leadership recognized that and proposed some solutions to involve PSTA in turning things around. So at that point, I think we more shifted our focus to the strategic direction and essentially either validate or respectfully invalidate the notion of whether or not use of PSTA was a good idea. And so that, in that sense, you're getting an independent third party to look at this from the outside and said, okay, does this make sense on utilizing the leadership and direction of Debbie Leas, CFO of PSTA, and to what extent? And so that's kind of what you're going to get from us in the next few slides to really, where we analyze that. It was a quick project. It was a 20-hour budget. Kelly Kavanaugh, one of my consultant leaders in Florida, performed it. She would have been up here today to present on it, but she's in Minnesota on a different engagement, so I get the lucky mop-up duty of presenting what her findings and recommendations. So just, and I don't want to belabor the obvious here and just some of the issues encountered, but this is irrespective of the grant detail and looking at compliance matters. This is just what Kelly observed in her observations through staff interviews and looking through procedures from start to finish. Just some things to point out here. Probably the third bullet is really the most revealing of not having that real centralized oversight function and things kind of going back and forth between staff. There's an external accountant utilized, but rather ineffectively, where she's kind of brought in at the end of the process, and her hands are tied until the information can come to her. And so she could have been integrated in the process more effectively. So we see here in the third bullet, just reporting completed by multiple staff, a lot of back and forth between staff, then the external accountant, then back to staff, which created inherent inefficiencies. The next piece here is maybe some technological limitations as well. TBARTA does currently use QuickBooks. It's really not ideally suited as a grants management solution. It works, but there are better solutions out there. And even I made a point on potentially utilizing an integrated timekeeping solution. So, you know, I know when I enter my time, it's by job, by engagement, and it's entered in real time, and a report can be downloaded immediately to determine what staff worked on, what specific activities to what detail for which grant, and that's there real time. And through use of current procedures, it's really being more done in the back end after payroll cycles are completed, accumulating that data and then making the allocation. So it's just less efficient. Then we've got shifting staff priorities. So again, you had one individual that was juggling duties between just general office administrative functions and then this grants administration with no, again, centralized grants management and oversight resource there to guide her through the process. So then we have some both near-term recommendations and then considerations for the long term. So as Kelly met with Debbie, it did seem like a clear, viable solution to bring PSTA in. So it'd be under Debbie's leadership, the CFO of PSTA, and then she also would bring in Pam Wrights, I believe, the grants manager. PSTA is also hiring a grant accountant to help some of the day-to-day accounting function, and then source in-house staff at PSTA in a support role on an as-needed basis that'll help alleviate all these problems. And again, in the immediate term, we need to transition to QuickBooks Online. It's currently an in-house product that PSTA doesn't have immediate access to, so we need to transition quickly to QuickBooks Online and give those PSTA individuals I mentioned the access that they need to be able to process transactions, review accordingly. And also, as far as the nuances of how it's all going to work, that would be between Debbie, her team, and then the existing resources within TBARTA, including the external accountant, Ellen Fontana, and using her more effectively in the process to make sure that we cure these ills, so to speak. And then just other recommendations in the long term. I think what we want to do first is let's get the new executive director in place, and then let's make some further considerations. So over time, what we're doing here, we feel is a great stopgap measure, but I think even Debbie might acknowledge this might not be the best long-term solution, potentially, but I think over time, especially as we were looking for this growth in TBARTA to be the regional transit leader, more grant dollars are going to come in the door. It probably will make sense over time to hire a full-time grant accountant that's a TBARTA employee that really owns it from inside, and then potentially, if they're based on future needs, complexity of the organization, potentially hire a CFO to assist in the leadership under the executive director. And then I mentioned here reintegrating the accounting function back into TBARTA over time and establish that new technology infrastructure to support those complex accounting, grants management activities, and finding the right technology solution that makes sense, that's efficient, but also cost effective and works for the organization. So those are some of the long-term focus I think TBARTA should take. We have some of the near term that, and I know Debbie's going to be presenting shortly, and she can maybe speak to some of the near-term stuff that I'm mentioning that she's already undertaking. So wheels are in motion. I would say just, you know, to all the problems that I identified, we're here to help as well. So, and I know you as board members want to know, okay, these were problems of the past. Where we look in the future, in the present, and we can come in and do a follow-up assessment, look at some of those findings that we had, ensure that they're not being repeated, and provide that information to you to make sure that things are happening as planned. So we're here to help in any way we can. So to that, I express gratitude for having the opportunity to work on these engagements, and happy to assist, like I said, in any way we can in the future to make things right. I believe that's all I have. I'll take any more questions you have. Otherwise, that wraps it up for me.
And a great presentation. One comment and question I had is TBARTA does evolve. and we compare ourselves to other transit agencies throughout the nation, it's a fair statement to say that most existing organizations that are the size that we contemplate becoming would in fact have a financial team, a CFO, and probably a grant administrator. Is that a fair statement?
I'd say yes, it is.
I think so. Okay, good. Any other questions then for
good question.
Andrew? Cliff?
The recommendations that you made, from my perspective, require a lot of hours to comply with. I'm assuming on a weekly basis. Is there, I mean, PSTA stepping in for us without adequate staffing here to support them, how many hours of time are going to be involved with this compliance effort on the near-term perspective, or do you have a feel for that?
I think Debbie Lewis is more in the trenches on that and could give the hourly commitment forecast. I know there's a staff services agreement that's in place that allows them to do that. Hopefully there's a lot of time on the front end, and as policies, procedures get put into place and we have standardized practices, that time will slowly reduce, but I can have Debbie address that specifically.
Thank you.
Other questions? Thank you, Andrew, for that good presentation.
Okay, appreciate it. Thank you all.
The chair now recognizes Debbie and Brad for a presentation on the 2019 draft budget.
Well, good morning, everyone. Debbie Leas, Chief Financial Officer from PSTA. And to try to answer before I get into the budget a little bit, the findings and recommendations of CLA I will be addressing. Every finding and recommendation requires a management response. I have no issue on behalf of TBARTA putting that together. These things, while it looks a little daunting at the beginning, really are not that much. I have spent probably a number of countless hours reading this uniform guidance. It's called 2 CFR 200, or the Super Circular. I think I've committed to memory all 236 pages related to procurement to make sure that our guidance is all up to date. So there's no sense in reinventing the wheel on some of this, that we can use what has already been vetted through FTA and approved for TBARTA on a lot of this. And some of it's going to be education on the part of the staff as to what needs to be done. Our staff is currently well-versed in all areas of the grants. So I'll be happy to go through, provide the management responses to that so it can come back out to the board. And if you want any further presentation, I can certainly do that. I don't think an organization this size will take a significant number of hours to go through. And I say that based on some personal experience that I have, where I do volunteer work for a veteran organization with a budget about the same size, and I do it on the weekend. So I think, you know, once you get the well-oiled wheels in motion, it will be just fine. So with that, I am very pleased to be talking about the budget looking forward for fiscal 19. And I had some goals in mind when I put the budget together. One was I wanted it to be balanced, and the other was a budget should always support the mission of the organization. So this budget supports not only the implementation of the regional transit plan and services, but the cornerstone of what TBARTA has been doing, which is the Van Pool program. I also wanted to put in there some advocacy and education funds, not only education of our federal and state and other governmental agencies, but education of the public, of what TBARTA is doing, and to be able to report out things in a timely manner of how the projects are going. Most importantly, we need to be compliant with the grant funding sources. One of the things, I've got 3 things that I've given you today. One is this copy of the presentation. Secondly is a copy of the budget. It's a proposed budget. And this is the first draft of it. What I'd like to do is also say to you, I'm going to be putting in the mission and all the pillars of your strategic plan into here going forward for the final draft. But I would invite all of you to talk to me and set up one-on-ones to see how it's going. What Commissioner Long was talking about is to how do we see for the compliance piece. I also put in what is going to be an internal worksheet. I call it my Easter egg worksheet in there. It's in color, and it's divided out in color basis between federal, state, and local funding. And it is compliant with what the grants stipulate. And I've reviewed this with FTA this week, and we went to FTA for PSTA work, but we took time to talk about TBARTA. I've also sat down with FDOT on this to go through to make sure that they're happy with how we've allocated it. So that, let's just say for whatever reason one of my staff wasn't doing this, anybody could pick up this guidebook or a roadmap and be able to know, I've got this invoice, what do I do with it? And it'll be very, very clear. And I think that's what's been missing in the past. So I'm very happy to say it's a small start, but it's a good start. With this budget, not only do we have it balanced, but we have a slight surplus of $29,570. My goal is to get to a point where we not only have 1 but 2 months of operating reserves so that we're not relying on our funding partners to give us advances or alternative payments, that we should be able to do this in a timely manner, and it also provides us then matches for some future grants. So as I said, the budget supports the mission. Cornerstone, the van pool program, we're going to be growing the van pool program by about 35%, up to 175, and I'm very happy if they exceed that number, but if your vendor exceeds that number, but 175 vans. This will have a positive impact in the long run because it'll increase the amount of money that you get from FTA based on this program. We also have, out of the $1 million state legislative money, approximately $639,000 dedicated out of that to move that forward. We also have, out of the $3.7 million of FTA funds, approximately $1.7 million also dedicated to advancing regional transit plans. We are making TBARTA stronger, and we've got money in there for a lot of community outreach. Well-needed, complete redesign of the website. I cannot say how many times I've gone out there and I can't find things. And then the federal and state government advocacy, I've got $150,000 set aside in the budget for that, all coming from local funds. And we are increasing the local funds in this budget from $200,000 to $300,000. Very important to keep this in mind, and I think as our stakeholders start to see how we're using their investments, we can continue to grow this over time. On the capital budget side, and that's at the end of the budget book, we've taken that $3.7 million of FTA funds and put, as I mentioned, a significant piece to regional transit, but we also have to remember things like what you've just heard. We have these findings because we need training, especially if you're going to be using more and more federal funds. The staff needs to understand, whether they're working directly with it or not, what is necessary. So FTA will pay for that training, upgraded technology. Their current technology that they have for their desktop laptops is about 10 years old. I'd like to have a meeting software not only used for board and committee meetings, but for any other meetings that TBARTA may hold. It'll make it a lot easier to upload and provide things, provide each of the board members with a tablet that will remain with TBARTA except for at meeting times. Software for all these nice procurements we're going to be doing called DBE software for the disadvantaged business enterprise. And down the road, I've programmed in money for financial software, as well as grant administration and what we call force account work, anytime that any of the staff members puts towards a project. Compliance, as we've talked about all morning, is extremely important. As I mentioned, I've reviewed these with FDOT and FTA, and there has to be, on everybody's part, whether it's the board, the staff, PSTA, vendors, everybody, a dedication to the financial processes and internal controls. This morning when we were driving here from PSTA, I talked to Brad about a book I'm reading called The Power of Habit. And I think what we really need to do is we have to believe that TBARTA is going to not only move forward, but we have to practice the habit of excellence in every single thing we do. And when we do that, our funding partners will be able to invest more and more into us, and we can continue to grow the regional transit. We have met some goals here of sustainability, as well as I'm going to be turning over to Brad for the future budget.
Thank you. I'm Brad Miller. I'm the CEO of PSTA. And I just want to say, we had a really good discussion after Andrew CLA's presentation about how important it is for PSTA, obviously, that we do focus on compliance, as Debbie just said. You know, PSTA, just like HART, just like Pasco County, as a transit agency, we meet those thresholds, so we are, it seems like, constantly audited by both the federal government and our partners at the state DOT for our grants. And thanks to my rock star, who you know now, PSTA has a stellar reputation. We have passed all those audits, and it is not my intention to mess that up. I report to Commissioner Long, and she's my chair, and the PSTA board. And we were just up in Atlanta on Monday, Debbie and I, speaking to the Federal Transit Administration about TBARTA and the grants that we're helping them oversee. And it's clear what PSTA is doing under the agreement. It's really, FTA is going to hold PSTA accountable for how these funds get spent moving forward. And I would imagine the same thing with the DOT. And we are very thankful to both the FTA and the DOT for working with us through these issues as we solve them. And they were very positive in Atlanta on Monday. But I just want to let the board be assured that we intend to right the ship, and our own reputation is on the line here. So with that, I would suggest perhaps, just for future thinking, that if it's not covered under a future regular TBARTA audit, that maybe the board would say in a year's time do this again, or do the same thing that he did this last go around, and hopefully I think that would give the board some assurance that the issues that happened in the past have been rectified. I also just want to say I'm not sure if such a challenging, say, cleanup mission was exactly the birthday present I wanted to give to Debbie today. It is her birthday, but way to go. She presents maybe in her mind, presenting a TBARTA budget is a birthday present. So again, as I spoke to you last month, really we're trying to look down the road. Obviously, it's very important to have a balanced TBARTA budget and to improve it. Having a new website, being able to hire lobbyists, and getting outreach in the community like TBARTA really never has been able to do will really, I think, strengthen the organization. It's also important, as we look to our legislative agenda, to have a thoughtful process on identifying what our ask is to the state legislature for the future. And so this idea of taking the FY19 budget that we now have of almost $2.6 million, and then identifying what might be in the future, so that then the ask to the legislature is one that is thoughtful and we can present to the legislature. I think that'll give us a better chance the legislature will be positive toward that. So what is beyond what TBARTA is now in the $2.6 million budget? Obviously, with the potential for implementing a regional transit system in the Tampa Bay area with $5 million programmed into the work program to advance the plan that has been presented, we're going to need additional staff. In addition, obviously, we're going to need additional financial staff and project management staff. So with that, obviously, some continued investment and just getting TBARTA up to the standard it needs to be on financial software and then out in the public. I've identified maybe about a $1.5 million in addition to what we've got now, and then that would be the delta that then we would ask the state legislature for recurring funds. Now maybe they wouldn't do that in the first year or all of that, and we would ramp up, but again, putting together sort of a logical way to present to the legislature, this is the path we're going on, and this is how we came up with our ask. I think will benefit all of us in TBARTA in the future. So with that, the plan, at least that we've come up with is that this is a draft budget, just a 2019 budget for your review today. It would come back to the board on your September 21st meeting for approval. Now, as Chair Holton mentioned, September 21st is going to be primarily taken up by interviewing the finalists for a new, hopefully very financially savvy leader for your organization. But we think with this presentation to you, hopefully you can in the next month review it, become comfortable, and that maybe be the one action item that otherwise we take at that meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Brad, and thank you, Debbie, for that great presentation. And the best prize we could have heard is that budget surplus there. So thank you for that. That deserves a round of applause. One question I had for either Debbie or Brad, and that is, we are looking forward. Do you have any substantive recommendations yet as to a software package that would potentially help implement these programs?
Depending on how the new executive director and the board wants to proceed going forward, financial software packages are extremely expensive. I've put about $500,000 in the budget for it. However, some of these packages that are robust could be a couple $1,000,000. We do have a software package that we use that does track grants and it does track projects. So it may be the kind of thing where you just utilize our system and pay a small fee every year to be able to do that. And we set TBARTA up as a separate division within our own software, so that you're taking that piece of financial burden off of you for the future.
But we want to make sure to be compliant with your agreements with the vendors too on that too. If we piggyback, I think that's an important issue because we don't want to run afoul.
Yeah, our software is very simple. I've used much more complex software. I actually developed the first software in the country personally for grant management and project tracking that was brought by another company. So, I kind of am taking my little simple software and making it into what I've had before. So I'm always happy to share whatever we have. And if not, we will go out and find some packages, and I believe CLA has looked at some packages as well that they can recommend.
Thank you. Other questions? Yes, Betsy.
I just want to make a comment. I did get the opportunity to read this finally last night, very late. But it's very impressive. I really appreciate the effort that went into putting together this booklet. I mean, it's not big, but it's succinct, and it kind of goes through a lot of different things. And I really think this was a good effort, so I just want to say thank you.
Other questions? One recommendation I may have, and I wanted to check its feasibility too, is the budgetary process is something where folks on boards like this often see the packet too late to really get into it. Would it be feasible with staff and with PSTA staff to, and I've had this experience in other boards throughout the state, for example, Citizens Insurance, for staff to schedule calls with each board member individually to brief them for maybe 10 minutes on the salient points of the budget prior to the meeting, so we all have questions that we can really flush out in the public meeting. Is that something we could do? And would the board like that?
Yeah, that's a good
to have that opportunity?
Mr. Chair, if I could speak to that for just a
Commissioner
minute.
Long.
Thank you, because it isn't just the budget. I mean, every other board that I sit on, our agendas come to us a week ahead of time. And I do believe, Mr. Zimmett, please correct me if I'm wrong, there's a statutory requirement for us as board members to receive agendas ahead of time, not the night before, when you're up until 2 or 3 trying to read everything. And in order to be thoughtful and deliberate, I really couldn't, I know we have this interlocal agreement with PSTA, but there's also a section, I believe it's subsection E in that agreement, that administrative services that are needed can be provided by PSTA. And while I am very passionate about this board, I am chair of PSTA, and I want to make sure that we are doing the right thing by them as well, since we're trading on their credibility. Correct. And assure that we are able to lean on them to get things like an agenda and like the budget ahead of time and be able to call Debbie and have a conversation with her if we have questions, so that we're not coming to the meeting and not being informed. I mean, clearly, as we grow and as we are more and more successful, be under a larger spotlight. And I think that's really important for the rest of us to be engaged as well. And I would just really appreciate it if the board could give their okay to that idea, so that we don't constantly have to run into pushback from staff.
I think it's a very point well taken, and
Thank you.
I, for one, would like to be well briefed, and I have the opportunity as chair to talk to Michael frequently, but I think it would behoove all of us to get a staff briefing in advance of the meeting on the key points, key issues, and especially when it comes to financial matters, because that's when we rely on the recommendations of people like Debbie to tell us and lead us in the right direction. So I think it's a great point. That's Kathleen.
I just want to thank Debbie again. I mean, happy birthday, really. But more importantly, I'm going to find an award that I can nominate you for. I think what PSTA has done for TBARTA is made it a functional platform that we can actually attract a talent to come and see that the region is committed to trying to get a transportation solution. And that's really, you know, above and beyond PSTA, Brad and Debbie's mission, but they really stepped up, and I commend, you know, Chairman Long and you know, Commissioner Seal and everybody else, because this is so fundamental to attracting talent. We would have never gotten talent based on, you know, where we're headed. You gotta know where you stand. And the only thing I was going to say that's really relevant is this package. I did read it last night. Is that I think we should get this in the hands of the legislature, even as marked as a draft. I mean, it's an educatory document as to the progress that the TBARTA has made. And I just worry that, you know, we're going to be knocking on doors in December, and there's not going to be, you know, the whole world could change in Tallahassee, trust me, in the next 30 days. So, you know, it is going to be a very interesting cycle of budget transition, whatever happens up there. And the earlier we get into at least the members of the legislature that know about TBARTA, irrespective of what their positions might or might not be, and say, this is where we are, this is the progress we've made, and this is where we're headed, is that realistic? Like, we should have these conversations next week.
Completely agree, and we had to get this in our hands first, I think, before we could go to the legislature. So I concur with that, and sooner the better that the policy and legislative committees can meet, I think, to really push that agenda forward.
Right, and again, Chair Holton, if I may, as chair of the legislative committee for Commissioner Shanahan, we have every intent of having our legislative committee meeting very, very soon. I'd like to get past Labor Day, though, because like you mentioned, we do have an election coming up, and we have a very robust plan, and getting this document is part of our agenda to take to the legislature and do a real educational process.
I just wouldn't wait till the end, until the September 21st meeting. So
No.
another month.
Labor Day is around the corner.
We get them a draft and say, here's the progress we're making. We'll get back to the real budget in September, October. You know, let's not lose September.
No, we won't lose it. Don't worry. Thank you.
Commissioner Starkey.
Well, on that point,
Commissioner Starkey, go ahead. And
I'm
Commissioner
sorry,
Seal.
which one?
Yeah, you first, go ahead.
Do we need like a cover sheet, you know, some kind of, I think we need some kind of explanation cover sheet to go with this. Just because I know some of them don't go into depth reading, so.
I think a summary and a letter probably signed by the chair, transmit a letter by the chair to the key committee members and some oversight committee members.
That would be great.
Commissioner Seal.
And I just want to add my kudos to Commissioner Long and to Brad and to Debbie. Thank you very, very much. Budgets are always important things, and something that we live and die by, really. So I did want to drill a little bit more into the rent and to ask if that is a lease that can be amended, or could it be, or could another agency co-locate in the space and share some of the costs?
Yeah, right now the agreement for the rent is what it is at this point. We may be able to see if we can get into a smaller space perhaps, but I think as you saw today, as we're looking forward, we may need a little bit of extra room for growth of staff in the future to house in there. I know from a funding standpoint, the state doesn't really want to be paying for rent, but they are going to be picking up a piece of it. The federal government is going to be picking up a piece of it, going forward, a large piece of it, about half. So I think that'll help to alleviate some of those things. One of the things I'm trying to accomplish through the budget is when you've got funding partners and they're investing in you, they have to be able to see an output, some sort of metric that they can measure to see progress for the investments they're making. Paying for rent isn't necessarily something that gives them a warm fuzzy, I would imagine. So I'm trying to spread out that little piece of it there. At this point, at some point, it would be great if TBARTA could pick up the whole piece. Matter of fact, Mr. Zimmet, the federal government will be picking up your expenses as well. That was something we negotiated with them.
Excellent. Good job. Happy birthday.
To that point, too, I would like to ask one question myself, and maybe Alan can address this. As a special district, wouldn't we be subject to Florida statutes, relocation rules, that preempts every lease, that if there's alternate government space that we can go into, we should be able to move into that and abrogate the lease? I thought that was prevalent in most.
I took a look at the lease and the issue, and I don't think we're going to get out of the lease early without paying a penalty. I think we're pretty well stuck with this lease until the end of the term of the lease, unless the landlord wants to be is in a very benefiting mood.
But as a state agency, we're not subject to that provision in Florida statutes of relocating to other government facilities that have. Okay.
Yeah, no, we're stuck.
Okay.
Until when?
Until, I forget the, Michael, do you remember the end date?
2020. But I don't recall the month.
2001?
Sorry, yeah, 2020.
2020?
2020.
2020, because it's
June of 2020.
There's some other questions. Okay, thank you guys for all of those, the great help and the great report. Oh, I'm sorry.
I don't have a question, I have a comment. Because we did go into a little bit of the legislative and the committee meeting this month. And, you know, I hope we all get notification of that committee meeting. I would just like to offer that as a point of order that I would like to be appointed to that committee. But further, I think it's important that we have too little information for this board coming from Tallahassee, and that we make sure that every item, every bill, everything in Tallahassee that affects TBARTA in any way is agenda'd for this meeting with someone here to discuss the implications of that bill, and that we have discussion and consideration of what that is on this board, because I think there has been too little of that information here and brought back to this body to actually recognize what the implications of all the bills in Tallahassee.
I think the legislative committee should brief us probably in their regular briefings and with the assistance of staff and what's going on. And of course, as you know, we could all do, hire someone of the bill tracking services to do that and subscribe to that. Point well taken. And which committee did you wish to?
The legislative.
You're so assigned.
Thank you.
Mayor Crosby.
Yeah, if I can follow up on that comment, looking at the 2019 operating budget, there's a line item for lobbyists of $150,000, and so I guess it's a twofold question. Is one, have we already contracted with a lobbying firm for that? And then secondly, I know for our city, we have a lobbyist, and that person is the one who reports back periodically during session to our legislative committee, so that committee is constantly informed, and that's a part of what's expected of that lobbyist as part of their contract.
Right. We have had issues with lobbyists' concerns before because there's segregated money you have to use. You can't use grant money to do that. As we evolve, We are obviously thinking about doing that. Nothing has been written in stone and so forth, but I'll let Brad address that question in terms of the budgetary issues.
Right, so thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mayor. You're right. The $150,000 that Debbie has included in the fiscal year 19 budget starts on October 1 when TBARTA's local funds go up from $200,000 to $300,000 to pay, so that can be accommodated. The $150K is an estimate of what both a state lobbyist in Tallahassee and a federal lobbyist combined might cost. That's approximately what PSDA and HART's I think cost total. And but it wouldn't kick off until October 1. Whether we could do a procurement and hire one in time for the legislative session, I think that would be very beneficial if we could do that.
So, Mr. Chair, may I ask a question of Brad?
Absolutely, Commissioner Long.
Chair, Brad, would it be possible in the interim, since we are entering a new chapter of TBARTA, and we have our legislative committee meeting coming up at PSTA with our advocacy group, could we amend their contract potentially to have part of their team take care of TBARTA as well for this coming up session, since it would be unlikely that the timing would give us, that we're in now, would give us the luxury of going out and procuring our own?
I think that's certainly a good possibility. We do, just FYI about the discussion, to Commissioner Kemp's point, we do have a legislative committee meeting now scheduled for TBARTA on Friday, September 14th, a week before your regular board meeting in the morning. So we'll be getting a notice out to all the committee members. We've been trying all summer to try to get on a recurring schedule rather than the old practice of Sue calling every one of you and trying to organize a date, trying to get on a regular basis for these committee meetings so that they could happen before the board meeting every month, and so there would be some kind of process to the thing. So it looks like that's probably going to be the schedule going forward. The Friday before the TBARTA board meeting, there would be at least, it's not probably ideal, but we'd have all the committees meet back to back, maybe for about an hour. Finance, policy, and legislative on the Friday morning before the meeting. So September 14th, we've got a policy committee and a legislative committee scheduled.
Just point of order, those dates have not been run past, I don't think, any of the chairs or committee members.
There was a doodle poll sent out. I know we have a quorum. We at least have a quorum, I believe.
My understanding, yeah.
I'll find out about whether or not the chairs have been confirmed.
Okay, I'll go
Sorry
offline
if
with
you didn't
I'll go offline with that.
Okay, yeah.
Starkey.
I don't want to preempt the legislative committee, but I'm wondering if, can we go ahead and discuss if we think a lobbyist is a good idea? Can we talk about putting out a, something, yes, an RFP so we can get started? I would prefer, if we were going to have one, to have our own. And I just wonder if we wouldn't want to consider putting the RFP out now so we can be ready with boots on the ground for this session.
Interesting point to think, Commissioner Banana.
Yeah, and because these, the lobbyist has to be paid from the local funds, I know the local governments sometimes don't pay until the end of the year, some of the local governments. We've had that problem in the past, where the funding has not come in from every local government. Some local governments were hesitant to actually even pay. They funded certain projects. That obviously would not be available for a lobbyist, so I'm not sure that we can do what we're saying we can do, hire a lobbyist when we don't have the funding. And unless I'm missing something. Do we have the funding in the bank?
We approved our funding.
No, it's my understanding that the chair has sent a letter to each county with their requested amount based on an allocation formula, and I don't know if any of the counties have approved. I would assume they would be approving it with your budget process that you would normally go through in September anyway.
Well, typically, a lobbyist would have a retainer, and I think if you have those receivables, again, I would defer to counsel on that. You know, you can enter into that contract if an RFP was led and the procurement rules followed. Counsel, any comments on that?
Yeah, certainly we could take a look and see if the counties have placed any restrictions on the use of those dollars. But we could do an RFP for TBARTA's own lobbyist, or going back to Commissioner Long's comment, we could also, there's a couple different ways that we could piggyback on PSTA's lobbyists, or maybe even one of the counties who have lobbyists. I know Pinellas County, for example, has lobbyists. I don't know if Hillsborough County does. But maybe we can look at St. Petersburg and see who their lobbyist is and see, depending upon how they did their procurement, whether we can piggyback on one of those. Also, your comment is correct. I mean, PSTA has a retainer agreement with their lobbyists, so if we were going to try to work through them, we would have to determine whether that's something that we can piggyback on based upon the RFP that PSTA did, or if there was some other methodology with them that we could work out an arrangement between the, based upon the interlocal agreement that we have with PSTA. So there's a lot of ways to skin this cat. So it's doable.
Commissioner Seal.
Well, not to put everybody on the spot, but if you've already gotten your letter, I know our budget is ready to go. And if you don't have to share it now publicly, but it would be very good if you could share with Jim whether your county is going to pay or not going to pay. And then that way we have some idea of where we are in this whole scheme of things. And then my next discussion is, I agree with Alan, maybe we should be looking at piggybacking on another contract that's much quicker and we can get moving. If PSTA is already in the transit world, and it seems logical to possibly piggyback on theirs or HART. The other thing that I would offer, and I'm sure Commissioner Long will back me up on this, but we already, each county, well at least we do, we have our own lobbyists, and I would commit to putting it on our legislative agenda. Of course, I have to have the rest, we have to have the rest of the county commission agree to that, but I'm quite sure our county would be very open-minded to putting it on our legislative agenda, which would be an in-kind service. And you know, the more counties that are up advocating in behalf of TBARTA, the better off we are. So, absolutely.
Commissioner Starkey, you had some comments.
Well, I'm checking to see if we approved something at the MPO meeting yesterday, but Pasco County, Pinellas County share the same federal lobbyist as well.
Yes.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah.
Harry Glenn.
Yeah,
Harry
Van
Glenn.
Scoya.
Van Scoy.
Other comments, Commissioner Kim?
I just have a question. So has there, in this budget, is there a projected increase for county contributions to TBARTA over last year?
Yes. Yes.
And what is that? How much is that?
I don't have it by particular county, but overall it's gone up from 200,000 to 300,000. I believe, as someone said, letters have gone out from Chair Holton to each county.
In May.
Yeah.
See, I think we approved ours yesterday. So.
And
yes.
It would, the additional revenue expected or contribution would specifically go to pay a lobbyist?
It can only come from your local contributions.
Okay.
So yes.
And the other I wondered about is, do we have a policy that we've passed as a board here on exactly what our positions are? Is there an official policy about what we want?
That was anticipated to come out of the legislative subcommittee, and that has not met yet, and so that would be something we would anticipate from them. To be proactive, I think, to Commissioner Starkey's point, we can start the process or look at these alternatives in terms of an advocate to get going. You know, in anticipation of having those formal requests done, because we are against the time clock of the legislative committee. meetings. So is there Commissioner Burnett?
And I only bring this up, certainly we've discussed it, our budget is not passed. I've discussed it, I presented that there was an increase to my board, there was discussion about it, but no one made any motions, they wouldn't pay it. We had a discussion about, what is the return, but one of the questions I did get, are the other local governments paying their fair share? Because in the past they haven't. In the past, Manatee County wrote the check first. In the past, other counties didn't come in till very late in the game. And I got that question from my board, so that's just reality. I don't know if it got better last year, if there were because there were holdouts that didn't pay the first year we did this. And honestly, I can't remember if last year it was better that every local government did pay their share, but there have been holdouts in the past, so that's why I brought it up.
I can speak to that briefly. There were problems with the first year. Last year, we received all of the contributions from each county with the exception of Sarasota. So this year, Hillsborough County has approved the allocation in a sum slightly over $120,000. As Commissioner Starkey mentioned, Pasco County approved the allocation yesterday, and I believe it's coming up on the Pinellas County agenda.
No, we approved
so
it.
So Pinellas County has approved it as well. But the time does vary on when those checks actually come in, because each county has its own process for when something is approved and has to go through accounting, and it takes time. So
again, is this the increased allocation?
yes, this is the increased allocation of a total of $300,000 split proportionally by population across counties.
Well, I would just like to say, again, as a point of order, as the only elected Hillsborough County representative here, I was disturbed that Hillsborough County, to this CEO committee, did not have, all the other counties had elected people on that committee, and we were overlooked in Hillsborough County for that. So I just like to, look at our participation in that process too.
Overlooked in what process?
In the appointment of the CEO and the review, the hiring committee, that we don't have an elected, we're the only county without an elected official.
We're not on there either.
Yeah,
Well,
that's at the discretion of the chair.
I understand.
Pursuant to a vote, and Melanie Griffith is certainly from Hillsborough County. I don't know that there's any mandate that we have to have any geographic representation.
There is not, but we don't have an elected representative from Hillsborough County, which I think is an oversight. I'll just say that at this time.
Well, take it under advisement.
Mr. Chair.
Cliff.
From a timing perspective, we're going to need to make a decision today whether we piggyback or hire our own lobbyist, budget for a lobbyist, and either way requires a budget for that purpose. So we need to act on that today, do we not?
Well, if that suggestion is totally critical, and that's on the topic of, on the topic of discussion right now, in terms of the legislative committee meetings, I would ask staff, do you think that we could get a solid recommendation from staff for the next committee meeting as to whether to let an RFP to piggyback, to do an interim piggyback, and make that decision now, or do you believe that it's critical that we move forward with an RFP or make that decision at today's meeting?
Well, I will say that PSTA has already discussed with our state lobbying firm, RSA Consultants, Ron Pierce, about the TBARTA budget. They're also the lobbyists hired by the Tampa Bay Partnership, so I know we've had discussions together about also, as was suggested by Pinellas County, having supporting the TBARTA legislative agenda when that is put together, to put that on the PSTA legislative agenda as well. I would suggest that we could make a decision, or the legislative committee of TBARTA, if it meets on September 14th, could review. Between now and then, we will look at St. Petersburg and the different county contracts for government affairs, see if a piggybacking option might work out there. I probably would be hesitant to launch an RFP prior to October 1 when the funds are all approved. But between now and the 14th of September, we can certainly see if there's a piggybacking option that just comes right to the top as something that, and present the different options to the legislative committee, and they can make a recommendation so we can get a lobbyist on board early October. I would think would be fine. And then in the meantime, as it was suggested, we can present sort of the budget that we have here in draft form as was suggested, and set up meetings. I don't think that precludes it. Obviously, the goal would be to have a legislative agenda, a very specific legislative agenda put together and approved by this board by September 21st.
Probably prior to an RFP, because you would have the scope issues in terms of
Yeah.
an RFP.
Yes.
Kathleen.
I was just going to agree with Brad. I mean, lobbyists, the strength of lobbyists, in my opinion, are based on the relationships that they have with the elected officials. And as I said earlier in the meeting, I think Tallahassee could be in a completely different relationship-based place in the next 30 days. So I think piggybacking on PSTA, if that would be possible for this session, if that's what we determine we need to do. But I really think we need to come up with a very targeted agenda, both at the federal and the state level, and start educating those affected legislative leaders on the progress made, and then figure out who's got the best relationships based on who we need to target. Probably, we're not going to really, we'll know a lot more in a week, but we're going to know a lot more, the 1st of October. So
Yeah, and to the point of scope too, I think without having a direction from the legislative subcommittee, we don't have a scope of services, and there would be, an RFP would be difficult to really try to turn around.
My point was not, Mr. Chair, I wasn't pushing for the RFP as much as budgeting for the services. I'm assuming if we're piggybacking, we're still funding the service. I'm thinking we need to have a budget for lobbying in Tallahassee, and then we also, as Commissioner Kemp said earlier, we need to have a specific agenda that makes it ours. I mean, as we move forward, we definitely need to be lobbying for our own interest in an entity that our lobbyists work for, TBARTA, so that entity is not confused with anybody else's agenda. Having all the other agendas support that is wonderful. But my point was more toward the budget, whether it's a piggyback or I also agree it's too soon to just throw out an RFP, but we need to budget for those services and then send the lobbyists to Tallahassee with an agenda that's been approved with policies from the board.
Correct.
That are clear.
And I believe the draft budget did provide for that. That's the point. So we were right on the mark with that. Okay. Other questions on that area? Okay, we'll move on to the next agenda item. Policy Committee did not meet. Melanie, anything otherwise to report? Okay. And Janet, the Legislative Subcommittee, nothing to report other than
nothing to
the meeting
report,
schedule.
Mr. Chair. We'll have a date for our meeting out very shortly, as Brad just mentioned.
Chair will recognize then Michael Case on the Regional MPO Coordination Study.
Sure. So this item pertains to the request that came out of the last board meeting that the MPO Regional Coordination and Best Practices Study, which is being managed by TBARTA, include an analysis of the impacts of an MPO merger between Pinellas, Pasco, and the Hillsborough MPOs on Title VI concerns. We have made the consultants aware of that. They were not available today to start addressing anything, but we will have them here in October. And in the context of a major update on the study, they can present some info on that matter. I would like this opportunity also to clarify a couple of things about the study, and as a reminder to the board that, again, TBARTA is managing the contract, the schedule, and the budget for this, and it is in no way pushing an agenda for a merger. This study is intended to be high level, looking at best practices across the nation for MPO regional coordination across counties. It is in large part guided by the directors of the MPOs in West Central Florida themselves, and is intended to present the facts concepts from other regions for their consideration in an effort to improve the results that they and we get from the regional coordination process. That said, the study direction does currently include a section on how similar or dissimilar the 3 core counties, again, Pasco, Pinellas, and Hillsborough, are to each other on a few demographic variables, as well as traits ranging from education of workforce, internal MPO structure, and commuting patterns. Some proper context for that is what it is intended to do is to help us, or help the MPOs, better understand how the core counties might react to different courses of action for regional decision making, which could possibly include a merger. But the study itself will present options, and that's the point. It is by no means an attempt to shut out local voices or water them down. In fact, the intent of this, and one of the focus areas, is to try to preserve and even elevate the local voice in the regional decision-making process. One last thing I'll add to this is that from what we've actually found in some of the best practices research so far, and again, the consultant can speak more to this in October, is that in other regions across the country with a single MPO covering multiple counties, there are variations across diversity. That's just the norm. The difference is in how much engagement is integrated into the public participation process that the MPO undertakes. So this is something the MPOs, depending on how they want to move forward with a recommendation, would have to develop, and is not a part of this study. So again, we're going to be flying the consultant in October. In the context of a major update, we can address this. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Questions for Michael? Commissioner Kemp.
Yeah. I'm disappointed that we don't have a consultant on hand to talk about some of these. I very specifically had mentioned some issues with it, like some of the graphs that they've already generated, which really I feel are intentionally misrepresenting the Title VI issues that we have before us and the diversity and unique position of Hillsborough County. I think it's important because you spoke differently of this, that this process, I think it's important for us to recognize and to know that this process began when the federal rule that was expected to require the merger of MPOs based on the urbanized zones, that rule was repealed by Congress. It was one of the first acts under the Trump administration, overwhelmingly repealed by Congress, both by Democrats and Republicans, and signed by President Trump. Nonetheless, this study was done in contemplation of that required merger. The scope of that study states, and this is important because this is different than how it keeps being portrayed in what the statement that you just made. It states that the purpose of the proposed research is to define what successful regional coordination means for Tampa Bay, identify the barriers to its execution through available empirical evidence, and develop several potential implementable scenarios based on an examination of nationwide best practices for regional transportation planning. This study isn't asking, should we do it? It's asking, how do we do this? This approach made sense before the rule was repealed by Congress. It doesn't make sense now. I think we need to be thinking about exploring whether this is a good idea or not. And I know specifically when I went to the MPO study meeting that they threw out any consideration of the fact that Broward and Miami-Dade and Palm Beach are all their own MPOs and actually get the most state resources and money, each independently in the state. And as they said, this isn't any kind of, as the study, the representative from the study was there and said that this is absolutely this is not done to get any further resources. That the way that places like Miami-Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach get their resources without combining MPOs is simply their weight in the legislature, their populations, and what they've gotten. Combining the MPOs does not do that. If we were to combine these 3 MPOs, by the way, we would have, and MPOs, as we know, were set up to get the input of the public and to have them have a say and a voice in their local MPOs. We would make an MPO that would be far bigger than Miami-Dade by combining these. And I think we hear already about the regional difficulties we have. We can't get people together for a quorum present over and over again to meetings. The other thing I'm really concerned about is that I heard in this scope, and I haven't been able to see that yet, the only place that the public input was made in the scope of merging these MPOs is in Pinellas County at the collaborative labs, 3 different times there during the day. This is not a way for us to have any access. And again, Hillsborough County is by far very, very different than Pinellas and Pasco County, and that is already being pushed aside by the study that combined the demographics of those 3 areas. We have hugely more diverse community, a younger community, a commuting community. We're the largest, we're growing. We already have the state of Rhode Island population. We have a population larger than 8 states, a land mass 3 times the size of Pinellas County. So as we move forward, I just think we have not been looking at all at our Title VI communities, and we haven't even put this in a place for discussion where the primary Title VI community is or are, and where the primary population is and the primary people that this is affected by. So I think it's important that that's noted even before we move to the October meeting, because we just keep moving ahead with this with an assumption that there will be a merger. And as
Commissioner, I think that we're going into political speech now, and I understand your point, and those issues will be addressed, but please don't beg the question. We haven't assumed anything yet. The purpose of the study is to determine and what to recommend, and there may be a recommendation to not merge. So I don't think we can, this is not the forum for advocating now, but is there a question you have? Or
well, I certainly want to raise the point that we don't have, that we haven't had, and we do not intend to have, because it was in the scope, even a single meeting in Hillsborough County to discuss this proposal.
Can you address that?
Sure, I can.
Mr. Chair, before he addresses it, please, I have a point of order. I know that this study has been done. I have not read it. Has anyone else on the board read it? So wouldn't it be wise if we could all have apparently the same information Commissioner Kemp does? Because I have no clue what she's talking about in terms of what's in the study.
In terms of, Michael is going to address that, I think, inclusive within where we are.
Yeah, actually, the consultants have been working hard over the past few months on research. Again, this has been directed by the MPO directors, and we plan to bring to you a major update on their findings in October. In regards to the comment about not having public meetings in Hillsborough, the reason that Pinellas County has been where the workshops are located is because that's where the St. Pete Collaborative Labs is located. That's where this project actually started back in 2017 when Pasco, Pinellas, and Hillsborough sponsored themselves putting together this workshop at the time that the FHWA proposed rule was going on, which, by the way, was not about merging together the MPOs. It was about encouraging MPOs that share urbanized areas to develop joint products, such as the Transportation Improvement Program. So it was not a push toward merger, although that came up in conversation, of course.
But in response to what you just said, Mr. Case, it's great that the consultants have been working on this and they have produced a study.
Well, the study's incomplete. So there's no formal.
The study's currently in process, right? There haven't been any major updates to present until October.
There's nothing in writing.
There are technical memorandums in writing, yes, but
apparently
it's still.
Commissioner Kemp has a lot of knowledge about it, and I would like to be able to read it.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
It's posted online.
Very small print.
It's one page?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of the discussion is somewhat premature to me as to what was done. We haven't even gotten the results of the report yet, so I don't understand.
I'm sorry, I
Right.
misunderstood.
But the graphs that were made, weren't they released to this board as well as our MPOs? We had a graph that was done on the populations and on the demographics. And what they did was combine the demographics of these area counties, not separating out the demographics of Pinellas, Pasco, and Hillsborough, which is what I'm asking for, that should be done. And I also, this study is in progress. I think it's important for us to recognize, and I think that that here we need to, I want to see, because they have already released this and it was already presented, but they do it, they have done the graphing in such a disingenuous way that you don't even understand the demographics.
Commissioner, without seeing the demographic and seeing the whole thing in its totality, I am in no position to judge whether that's true or not.
I understand.
I would strongly recommend that you, as a member of this board, interact directly with the folks conducting the study and raise those internal objections to them before we can make any findings of fact or recommendations as to the efficacy of the study.
I'm not asking for a finding of fact. We already had this presented to us, these graphs. They just passed by like this. We know because I had asked that study group that in the scope, they said they couldn't have a meeting in Hillsborough because it's not included in the scope. So they weren't even permitted by scope. This is what I've asked. This is what I asked last week.
That's not true. We're actually working on having the third workshop in Hillsborough County. Again, in the scope, following on the workshop that the MPO sponsored back in May, we continued with collaborative labs because that's where this process originally started. So we are now just turning the corner here with the second workshop, which is on Monday at Collaborative Labs. And we are working on the possibility of having it in another county, possibly Hillsborough or Pasco.
Procedurally, I think we have to wait until we see what's done, and I would urge you to work with our staff and with the folks at Collaborative Lab and the authors of the study to make any adjustments. But it's premature for this board to amend our scope or anything at this juncture to find that. Commissioner Seal.
Yes, a couple things. Is there a link ahead of time that we can read some of the materials that'll be presented on Monday?
Yes, actually, everything has been posted online on the TBARTA website. There are a couple of pieces of information in your packets today. One is a 4-page resource guide that participants of the workshop will receive to provide them the proper guidance. There's an agenda as well, and we plan on distributing all this information because we've been working tirelessly and tediously on making sure that all the language that the study management team wanted is incorporated into this. So we plan on distributing it widely today.
Okay. The next thing would be, I know that it's open to the public, obviously, but if we know who the attendees are at this point, if you could forward that information, I'd appreciate it.
Absolutely.
And finally, I'm not going to put the secretary on the spot, but if there were to be any merger, it would obviously have to go through extensive public hearings. It would have to follow both the state and the federal guidelines, and I think it's important to let the public know that there would be full vetting and a whole lot of open meetings in a lot of different places before anything would ever happen. So I really want to assure the public that this is not something being cooked in the background, that's secretive in any manner whatsoever. And finally, I want to commend, this will be kind of out of the box, but both Mayor Kreisman and Mayor Buckhorn for their regional alliances that they've done, especially now with the Cross Bay Ferry, and a lot of other things that reach across the counties to make us all work together. So thank you both.
Yeah.
Kathleen.
Yeah, my only point was what Commissioner Seal said. I mean, I think it sounds like it started with MPOs leading this request to look at how we can frame out regional transportation efforts.
Correct.
And it's evolved over 3 years.
Over 2 years.
Over 2 years. So I think that's a great conversation to have, and there'll be some findings that'll come back and we can evaluate those.
Correct.
And everybody should participate as a single voice, not as representative of this group saying, do this or do that.
Absolutely correct.
Okay. Thank you.
One follow-up, and please limit the time, because we do have to.
Well, I'd like to just reiterate, since for the purposes of what I did ask for last month, and it's not clear to me that that is what we have going forward. The NPR Regional Coordination Structure, Research, and Best Practices for the Tampa Bay Region Study, I would like to make a motion that they be required to make and report a comparison between the demographics of Hillsborough, Pinellas, and Pasco counties, and address how the merger, it should be at least a segment of this report, and this is the time to do it when it's in process, how the merger of these 3 MPOs would impact Title VI communities.
Is there a second for that motion? None being heard, the motion will not be considered. All right, we're going to move on from that point. Michael, I turn the floor over to you.
I'll be very brief because it is getting late. The TBARTA van pool program is holding steady at 125 vehicles, the same as last month. We've been working on some procedure elements with the enterprise to make sure we're maximizing the return on the investment of this program, starting with improving the occupancies of existing vehicles. Some of them are operating at less than 50% occupancy, so we are communicating in tandem with them more often with our employer liaisons to make sure we're able to rectify those issues and find riders. Regional school commute program is doing well. School's back in session. We've recently added 5 more schools for a total of 128. 3 are also now participating in the Pick My Kid pilot, which we plan to bring an update on that to you at a future meeting. Some other projects, as covered last time, we've been working with PSTA on closing out some of the federal grants we have. One in particular, the One Call, One Click project. We've moved forward with a piggyback contract with PSTA with HNTB, so we expect fully that the grant and project will be closed out by September 15th, which is a full 2 weeks before the expiration period of the grants. As mentioned very briefly too, the Regional Transportation Leadership Workshop number 2 for the MPO study is this upcoming Monday, August 27th. Again, materials that we're sharing in the workshop have been provided in your packets. If you are interested in attending and we're not able to RSVP within the time period, see me after we adjourn and I can make sure that you have a seat. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Michael. Any questions for Michael? Okay, none being heard. Is there any new business for the board?
Can I just take one chance? Chairman, I'll make this real quick. At the end of the last meeting, there was a question asked about FDOT and our current opinion on whether buses should operate in express lanes or in shoulders adjacent to express lanes. And what I said, and what is true, is that our policy is that we prefer to have buses operate in the express lanes as opposed to the shoulders next to the express lanes. But I guess I didn't get enough information in there to make sure that it was not maybe viewed and interpreted a little differently than we wanted. And that this refers specifically to the Howard Franklin Bridge. The question really was not specific to the Howard Franklin Bridge, but I think the newspapers have kind of taken it in that direction. I wanted to make clear a couple of things. One, the bridge is wide enough to handle, as we've got it in our RFP now, to handle a dedicated bus lane in each direction if that is needed. Our intention is to operate the express buses in the express lanes and leave the shoulder open for the intended safety purpose that it's normally used for. We allow the use of our shoulders in areas where we don't have something like an express lane where a bus may need to bypass congested traffic. But we don't necessarily want to provide a shoulder if there's already an uncongested lane for it to operate in. And so that was the intent of what I was saying. But I wanted to clarify, the bridge won't be open until 2023 or 2024. That's when it'll be. One of the very last things they'll do is strike the bridge. They'll put the lane lines down there. In order to accommodate a bus lane, if we needed to, all we'd have to do is move the lines a little bit. And we could do it. There's room on the bridge to do that. We don't need to put out an RP and say make it a wider bridge. all right? We also one of the complaints that I heard was, what if in the future somebody decides to take tolls off the express lanes and we no longer can manage the speeds and it's no longer a reliable transit corridor? Also, what happens if we artificially cap it and then it becomes congested as well? And what we said is that if at some point in the future we were to find that that was not going to be a reliable transit corridor, we could very easily restripe it, provide that bypass shoulder just like we are in other areas. And what I did agree to do, just to make it 100% certain, is that we will put in the RFP for the design build teams that they will have to verify that if in the future we were to go to a different configuration that would allow buses to operate on the shoulders, that their plans are accommodating that. And they should, because it already has the width out there. So the other thing, just to add a little bit of a surety, we added a second express lane, not based on the demand that we see. Originally, we had one express lane in each direction. We added a second one for things like hurricane evacuation, emergency services to get to a crash on there, the future of perhaps autonomous and connected vehicles, and also for a transit corridor. So we're confident that those express lanes are going to work correctly, but our plan B and backup will work. We have enough room. We don't need to make any changes to the RFP. So,
thanks. I appreciate that comment, and that is confirms what I verified also with the governor's office and others, that there's accommodating room to do that. And I would add, for the board's benefit and the public too, that you have added 2 additional tolling lanes in that configuration, so this bridge will have the capacity to restripe one of those and dedicate them should it need to do so, based on traffic patterns.
Correct.
Commissioner Starkey.
I did want to share that our MPO meeting yesterday, our board has asked that there be a dedicated lane all the way from Wesley Chapel to St. Pete. So there was raised yesterday concerns that if the bus goes into regular traffic during that portion of the expressway that is near, I think it's Flatwoods, that they're going to slow down. So that request was made yesterday. I'm sure you'll be seeing it.
The one thing just to remember on that, and there has been a discussion about should there be a 41-mile dedicated lane the whole route. If you remember when we went back and started doing the feasibility study, when they did the costing for that,
right.
It was over $2 billion.
Right.
They came back to us in order to say, is there ways that we can try to get synergy from highway projects to bring the cost down so that it would be competitive for federal funding, which we'd have to cut probably by about 2/3 to get down into that federal funding area. That's why we said the shoulders and express lanes would be a viable alternative to a dedicated bus lane. But ultimately, this board is going to make a recommendation to us at some point in the next few months as far as we have $5 million for the PD&E study. It'll go into that study. The feasibility study that we're doing now, typically the recommendations, the level of detail it gets into is it says bus or rubber tire from here to here. It doesn't say where it's getting on, where it's getting off, where it goes in a shoulder, where it goes in express lane. The PD&E will get into that stage. And then when that is over, then it'll come up to a funding issue. Is there a desire to fund that project and build it and what it's going to look like? So we've kind of jumped the gun a little bit on the details. All that'll be worked out, but we're saying we'll provide those opportunities if that's what is needed.
And I mentioned that to them, and while I have my own opinions, I represent my board here, not my own. So I just wanted to share that with everyone.
Understood.
Yeah, and to the Secretary's point, a lot of this is contingent on a PD&E too, in terms of what's safe and what's feasible and all that. And we are awaiting, as a board, the results of some of those PD&Es before making the final recommendation.
And available funds.
And available funds. Commissioner Kemp.
And I'd just like to point out that it seems like as if the only dedicated corridor that travels across counties and throughout this region that is immediately available throughout every single county that we're mentioning is the CSX tracks. And goes through all these areas. So I think that's important because it could be converted for, I mean, we're talking billions of dollars here. There could be far less than that compared to the Orlando, Miami projects.
And as we've always said, that's a potentially viable project and under consideration. And if the MPOs decide to do that, look at that, that's a viable project.
And it goes through all 3 counties.
No one has disagreed with that analysis, but it's just, again, we are taking things sequentially as we've been mandated to do. All right, is there any other business to come before the board? None being heard, I'll accept a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
You don't need a second to adjourn.
I don't, but I like to have one anyway, so. All right, meeting adjourned.